Greetings everybody, my name is Dr. Greg Fitzgerald and this is my backyard where I live in Sydney. I work as a clinician with my clinic downstairs, and I have the privilege of sitting next to Jean Oswald, who co-authored two books with Dr. Herbert Shelton over 45 years ago and wrote a magnificent biography of Dr. Shelton called Yours for Health, The Life and Times of Herbert M. Shelton, which I read many, many years ago. And it's a privilege for my wife and I to be with Jean and her husband Brad, who'll be helping us out with the filming of this particular interview. And I'd just like to say how Dr. Shelton influenced my life, because I read a book many, many years ago called The Greatest Health Discovery, Natural Hygiene, Its Evolution, Past and Present. And this had a lot of information and inspiration about Dr. Herbert Shelton, which was my first introduction to him. I then bought a book by Dr. Shelton on exercise, and then another one on nutrition, and from there I bought many other books, some of which we'll be talking about today. It was a privilege to have Jean Oswald, author of Biography of Herbert Shelton and co-author of two books with him, sitting right next to me here. Jean, how did you first learn about Dr. Shelton?
Well, I had suffered from asthma. I had it when I was 11 years old, and I was suffering for about 15 years, and I was covering up symptoms by taking drugs. And I didn't know at the time, this was quite a while back, that this was not the route for myself, that I was getting progressively worse. And I was at a health food store, and I saw this book, Fasting Can Save Your Life by Herbert M. Shelton. I thought, I'm ill. I took this book home and I became an instant fan, and I read other books at the time, and I made an appointment at Dr. Scott's Health Institute to undergo a fast. And I think, if I recall at that time, some of my friends said, "What are you, nuts?" And so I continued to go ahead and make the appointment.
Right.
Could you tell me, Dr. Fitzgerald, what happens when patients such as myself cover symptoms year after year?
Very good question, Jean. And it's a problem I see all the time in my clinic and have done for over 40 years. Because we're living in a world where the medical profession and the pharmacological industry have indoctrinated everybody to believe that their symptoms are their enemies. The symptoms you get are your foe, your enemy, when in reality they're not. Dr. Shelton said they were allies in disguise. They were the body working as designed. So symptoms like coughing, sneezing, vomiting, diarrhea, fevers, all of these symptoms are in effect manifestations of the body defending itself. You breathe in dust, you cough. Coughing is not an enemy. It's an ally. It might be irritating, it might be uncomfortable, certainly, but it's not an enemy. It's there to do a job. Many, many years ago, I received a phone call from a medical doctor who at the time was a patient of mine for a back problem, but he had no real understanding of true health. And he rang me one day and he said to me, "Greg, quickly, can you tell me the difference philosophically between your views and my views? You know, you're a naturopath and a hygienist. I'm a doctor. I deal in drugs and surgery and so on. Is there a philosophical difference?" I said, "Yes." I said to him, "Dr. So-and-so, what do you do when a patient comes to you and they're vomiting?" He said, "We give them a drug to stop it." And I said, "Do you have a spatula at home?" which is a little tiny mini shovel. He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you pick the vomiters up and put it back in their mouth?" He said, "Of course not, that would be stupid." I said, "Well, by stopping the vomiting, aren't you implying that the vomiters should stay inside the body? He said, I've never thought of it that way. I said, what about diarrhea? Would you stop the diarrhea? He said, yes. I said, so by implication, you're saying the diarrhea should stay inside. I said, so there's a philosophical point of difference instantly. We view the body as working as designed with these symptoms. When you have a symptom, for the body to manifest that, like your coughing when you had asthma, the wheezing, these are all symptoms. It's the body doing its best to recalibrate itself and bring itself back into homeostasis or balance. And it requires vitality and energy to do that. Now, when you stop those symptoms, you are stopping the vitality. You are suppressing the vitality. And by suppressing the vitality, you're suppressing your life force. And so that is one of the points of difference between the hygienic approach to acute disease and the medical approach. They stop the symptoms. The hygienist will not suppress the symptoms, but will allow the symptoms expression, not suppression.
When I went to Dr. Scott's, I saw what you're talking about, that the medical profession and what the work was being done at Dr. Scott's, they were on a collision course. And I didn't specify how many days I would fast. Dr. Scott just had said, we take this one day at a time. And I did fast 28 days, and I learned that fasting is not a cure. In fact, it's intelligently doing nothing. And I was rejuvenated so much at the end of the fast, and learning from other patients. Dr. Scott had about 14 other patients while I was there. And it was a time that we spoke of our own experiences, and we learned a lot from one another. I started a diary while I was at Dr. Scott's, and I had always worked on writing when I was a kid. I had poems published, so it was all very easy for me to write. And after the fast, Dr. Scott encouraged me. He said, we both saw a book there, and I did too. And so I finished the project that I was writing, and I did find a publisher and an agent afterwards. And what we did, we looked at this, the agent and I said, we need more authority. So I asked Dr. Shelton, Dr. Shelton, we need some case histories from you, more authority on this project. I was delighted right away. He was right there, and he said, come down, we'll finish that book together. So that was my initial meeting.
Fantastic.
And you also heard Dr. Scott speak at a conference. What was your opinion there?
Dawn, my wife, and I went to 2 conferences in the late 80s, and Dr. Scott spoke at those conferences and impacted me greatly. I liked his sincerity, his humility, his knowledge, his wisdom. And I remember him saying something to this day, many years later. He said, most people don't lie down and stay down when they're sick. I'll never forget that statement. Most people don't lie down and stay down when they're sick. And I've never forgotten that. But I was just impressed by his general wisdom and knowledge of the human body, of the biology of health and disease. And I then corresponded with Dr. Scott a couple of times on email, and found him very obliging and very helpful. I was very saddened to see him pass away, of course. But Jean, tell me, what was it like to meet Dr. Shelton in person for the first time?
Well, he had everything all arranged. He was lived in one room at the health school, and this was in San Antonio, Texas. And I was overwhelmed because I was such a fan for so long, and I knew that his mind is a genius mind. He could remember everything. I will say that physically he was not doing as well. Mentally he was sharp as a tack. And when we met, he had told me that he had been suffering from enervation. Dr. Shelton, at that time, he was 83, going on 84. He was in a wheelchair. However, his spirits were up, he was laughing, the wit was there, he would make comments and make jokes. And I did work with him from age 83 to 89. Now, Dr. Shelton overworked in his life, and he told me that. He said, I didn't get enough sleep, and his wife told me he was hounded, persecuted, day and night, and this was the start of the enervation. Dr. Fitzgerald, could you elaborate on enervation?
Yeah, enervation is fundamental to an understanding of health and disease. Dr. Isaac Jennings was an intellectual giant, like many of these founding fathers of natural hygiene. And a couple of 100 years ago, he was talking about getting run down and energy being zapped out of our bodies, and he introduced the concept of enervation, which is really a situation where the body lacks vitality chronically. Not just when you're tired, when you've had a hard day at work or you've had a hard exercise session, you feel tired. No, this is day after day of profound and chronic tiredness at the cellular level. Now, back in Jennings' day, 200 years ago, they never understood mitochondria, which are the little organelles in the cells that manufacture energy. We do know now with modern science that the mitochondria get exhausted, and that leads to this chronic enervation or chronic fatigue. It is one of the worst things that happens in our modern society. People are more tired than they think, but they're stimulated to delude themselves that they've got energy, so that when they feel tired, they'll have a cup of coffee. When they feel tired, they'll have a cup of tea. When they feel tired, they'll have a bit of chocolate. When they feel tired, they might even go for an exercise session and flog their body. And they might feel temporarily elevated and temporarily stimulated, but the end point of that is more innovation leading to toxemia, leading to a disease state of the body. In my clinic, I've got a sign: don't soldier on. Don't soldier on. Soldier on was an ad on our television in Australia which implored people when they were tired and sick to soldier on, to keep going, take a stimulant and keep going, take one for the team and keep going. And of course, it was one of the worst things for the general health of the population. So in my clinic, I've got here the opposite. Don't soldier on. Keep your energy, because your health is largely dependent upon your vitality kept in reserve. We need reserves. And unfortunately, Dr. Shelton, like many of his contemporaries, and like many people today, they work too hard, they play too hard, and they don't get enough sleep and rest, because they're the only things that revitalise us are sleep and rest. Exercise doesn't give us energy. Exercise takes energy. Many patients say to me, oh, Greg, I need to exercise when I'm tired. I said, no. I said, if you're tired and you exercise, then if you keep exercising 24 hours a day, you'll never feel tired again, will you? You don't have to sleep. Just keep exercising like a rat on a treadmill 24 hours a day. Oh, I can't do that. Of course you can't, because exercise uses energy. Sleep and rest provide energy by repair, rejuvenation. So innovation is something to understand. Don't push ourselves too hard. Dr. Shelton pushed himself too hard, paid the price. We all do. We all push ourselves. We don't want to do it too much. We need to be mindful of it, June.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was a typical day, Jean, working and completing the book with Dr. Shelton called Fasting for the Health of It?
Okay, a typical day was, he would generally get up at about 8. He would finally get his rest. And I was able to meet his wife, and his wife, Ida, They were married 64 years, and she did not live at this health school at that time. She would come in to visit, and she said, Jean, he was hounded day and night. He just would so on continue. And so I understood that about him, that you have to lay back a little bit and not enervate him. So after he had breakfast, and often we had breakfast together, we would start working, and we were compiling 200 case histories. He first dictated 25 histories to myself. Dr. Shelton, in his stage when I met him, his hands from writing 40 books, and at that time he wrote them with pen and pencil. His hands were stiff, and he depended on me with my hands to write. So I did so, and we did not stop working, and I had to tell him, okay, it's time to rest, we're going to take a break. He would walk outside the school, not without help, and he would get his daily exercise, and he would get his sunshine, and when we'd come back in, he was refreshed, and we'd start again. So supper time, he had 2 meals a day. Supper time was about 4 o'clock. So when I look back, we had hundreds of meals together. After supper, we basically started to close things off for the day, where he was going to rest for the next day. So a typical day was one that I not only worked with Dr. Shelton, but I did get to meet with Willowdene, his daughter, and Ida Shelton, which was a wonderful experience. Also, in the evenings, I would sit in his lounge, and there were 40 fasters at that time when I was there. I was able to talk with them, and they also inspired me with their great healing that was taking place at the health school. I worked with his protégés, Dr. Scott, Dr. Esser. They all were just very supportive. Dr. Benish, Dr. Vetrano, and also Dr. Burton in Australia. Now, that's a person that you personally know. Could you tell us about your experiences with Dr. Burton?
I first saw Dr. Alec Burton at the Osteopathic College when I was studying well over 40 years ago, and he was one of our lecturers. And I was immediately impressed by his erudition. He was just such a wonderful speaker. His knowledge, his wisdom, his humour. He had a very, very sharp sense of humour. And I was just smitten. And I was just so blessed to have him as one of my personal lecturers during my studies. And I got to know him very well. And I started to learn more about the concept of natural hygiene from Dr. Burton. And I loved his lectures. And then I'd go to his clinic up at Arcadia, out there outside of Sydney, with his wife Nejla, which they had were running. And I did a couple of fasts under Dr. Burton myself. My wife did a fast. And then I started sending patients to Dr. Burton to fast. And then we started lecturing together. And we teamed up and did dozens and dozens and dozens of public lectures. I would lecture at his clinic, he would lecture down here in my area, and we would fill the rooms with interested people who wanted to learn the truth about health and disease. So I was highly impacted by Dr. Burton, and I'm blessed to this day, and I know every student who was with me during that time has said the same thing. They all said we were so fortunate to have Dr. Alec Burton lecture us and get to know him. That's how I got to know Alec.
Oh, awesome.
What interactions did you have with the famous author at the time, Dr. Robert S. Mendelsohn?
Okay, Dr. Mendelsohn was very popular at the time when I was down with Herbert Shelton, down in San Antonio, and I live in Milwaukee. I was a Milwaukee public school teacher, so I did have time off in the summers, and I was able to take a sabbatical from school. So Dr. Mendelsohn, he was quite famous at that time. He was on the Bill Donahue show. He wrote Confessions of a Medical Heretic, and I was able to go to his lectures. Being in Chicago, I was in Milwaukee, he would speak. I got to know each other, and I had asked him if he would write the foreword to our book, Fasting for the Health of It, and that I was working with Dr. Shelton on case histories. He was delighted because Dr. Shelton had said that if I were not still living and I'm listening to Dr. Mendelsohn, I would believe he was a reincarnation of myself. So he was very honored with that. He supplied the foreword. He, at the time, felt that 90% of medical surgery was not needed. And that was right in agreement with Dr. Shelton. He felt that 90%. However, both men highly praised the medical profession for the 10% when it was needed, and also praised the doctors for the care of accidents. So it wasn't just a one-sided. After we finished the book, Fasting for the Health of It, it was successful. And I had asked Dr. Shelton to work with me, and he had been asked to write a book on diet. And I was there, about to leave, and he had asked me, would you like to work on a book on diet? So I was overwhelmed, and so we started a book, and it was called The Original Natural Hygiene Weight Loss Diet. Joe Willard at the time, news travels fast, she says, I have this publisher. I want Keats Publishing, because the publisher of Fasting for the Health of It had retired. And so Dr. Shelton and I agreed. We brought her in the project, and this book was also successful. We have had Dr. Fitzgerald write and supply the foreword to the book, which we appreciate. And Dr. Shelton said himself that if one follows the weight loss program and the maintenance program, you will heal without fasting. Just keep following the diet. And when we were at the health school together, we noticed that people were so toxic when they came down that just following the diet, their bodies started to heal and eliminate toxemia in their bodies. So this book was very successful. When we finished that project, I asked Dr. Shelton, it was my turn. I asked Dr. Shelton, people have said that a biography, we don't have a biography of Dr. Shelton. And he was very generous with his time, and I was honored. He said, you of all people should write my biography. So I said, we need to do this together so I can get this accurate, good information. So that's when we started the biography together.
Fantastic. If I could also say, Dawn and I, my wife and I, had the privilege of meeting Dr. Robert Mendelsohn when he came to Australia in 1986, maybe a couple of years before he tragically and prematurely passed away. And I'd read his books, Confessions of a Medical Heretic. He wrote a few other books. He wrote one book on children's health called How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. He wrote a book on women's health called Male Practice, but the E was faded out, which then made it spell malpractice, and it was subtitled How Doctors Manipulate Women. He co-authored a book with 8 other doctors called Medicine in Dissent, one of whom was Dr. George Cryle, I think, who is the father of Anne Esselstyn. Don't quote me on that, but I think so. But anyway, I was so impressed by Robert Mendelsohn. I was also a subscriber to his newsletter, The People's Doctor. Mm-hmm. So I was a very big fan of Dr. Mendelsohn. I was so thrilled to see that he wrote the foreword to that book. But Jean, tell me, what inspired Dr. Shelton to become a doctor, and when did he open his school in San Antonio?
Dr. Shelton told me himself that He was inspired at a very young age. He was raised on a farm, and he noticed that farm animals would fast when ill. Dr. Mendelsohn was one that he said, that was great. He learned from animals, not by testing, but just observing in a healthful environment how they respond. And Dr. Shelton was about 1911. He came across Physical Culture, which was published by Bernard McFadden, and on the cover he had a picture of a very healthy, energetic looking man, and Dr. Shelton grabbed this magazine and he began exercising. He increased his weight with muscle at that time, and he was already interested in natural healing. At such a young age, Dr. Shelton was feeling that this is my career, this is the direction that I'm going to go in. And his father, when he told his father he was going in the direction of Mr. McFadden, his father was irate, and he said, "You're not going to not be a medical doctor." And so that's when it started. They had a confrontation of, "Dad, I'm going to go to this college in Chicago, and that's what I want to do." So he didn't have an easy road to start, but he was very determined. He was very determined. And after he left home to go to Chicago, his father had actually spent his money that he was saving to go to that college. He spent about a third of it. And Dr. Shelton had learned very early in life, he said, "Forgive everyone everything." And those words he lived by. Forgive everyone everything. And he went to school there. He graduated with honors in nutrition, natural healing, drugless healing at that time, chiropractic, naturopathy, all these degrees that he had, but not a medical degree. When he was very energetic with his practice, he was having trouble with the law. He had been married, and they would come to his lectures because he was ruffling a few feathers with 90% of medical treatment is not necessary, and he was going, the diets are going full speed ahead with bringing in chemicals in our food, and he was against all these things. Well, he was set up. He was set up often where someone would come in and pretend they were a believer of his work, but they were not. And they ensnared him, and they had police there, and he was actually handcuffed. And his wife at the time told me that they couldn't even stay in New York because they were at his doorstep. He had become popular because that same magazine that he saw, the Physical Culture magazine, Dr. Shelton was a well-known writer for Mr. McFadden. And so his name was out there. He also wrote for the New York Evening Graphic. But because of his rest, the president at the time had even said, this man Shelton can stay in jail the rest of his life. But as we know, Galileo, Socrates, other great men have suffered this persecution for being ahead of his time. So they had no choice. They left New York and they moved back where they both were from, and that was in Texas. And that's when he opened his first health school.
Mm-hmm. What challenges did he have when he moved to San Antonio, Jean?
You have to understand the position that Dr. Shelton was in too. His patients were getting well, and they didn't come back. And they didn't have to come back, and he didn't want them back, because he felt that health care is self-care. Health is not bought. You live by healthful living. And he would often go to cities to lecture because he brought in more people. And at that time, Dr. Shelton had already began writing. He was a gifted, prolific writer, a genius, and he had so many books that were out. He became a target also in San Antonio, so he was dealing with that. He was arrested 3 times in New York, and in his lifetime he was arrested 5 times in San Antonio. Now, 2 of the cases he won, but it cost him so much with having attorneys, and he did struggle, but at the positive note, people kept coming, and he had to actually have a bigger place and a bigger place each time. And his school in 1959, it was given to him, a gentleman by the name of Charles Doolan. He was so inspired, and he was quite wealthy. He gave Dr. Shelton $50,000, you need a bigger place. And so then he had the last Dr. Shelton's house school that had 40 people.
Wow, wow, gee whiz. What was his relationship with Mahatma Gandhi?
That was in 1943 when Dr. Shelton told me that Mahatma Gandhi asked him to come to India because we need you. He had read his books. He was famous at that time internationally, Dr. Shelton. Helen Keller was familiar with him, George Bernard Shaw, so it wasn't unusual for someone like Gandhi that heard of his work. He had asked Dr. Shelton to come for a period of 6 years, and Dr. Shelton, I can't come for that long. But then he agreed, I will come for 2 years. And World War II intervened, and they did not get together. But they still, a person that was fighting here, Dr. Shelton, for freedom in healthcare, and Gandhi, who was fighting for freedom and political freedom, the 2 minds did meet. After World War II, Gandhi had died at the age of 78. Now, he had written volume 3 that Gandhi had at his bedside, and this was one of the 7 volumes that Dr. Shelton synthesized in Natural Hygiene, and it's probably one of my favorites. And at the time, Dr. Shelton had a review, the Hygienic Review. He had first, that was his own magazine, he had first started the magazine in 1931. He was unable to sustain the cost because he was going to run this magazine by himself. He noticed that Mr. McFadden, when his magazines got bigger and bigger, he had to take advertising to keep it going, that he was not in favor of. So Dr. Shelton learned from him, and he was determined to do the magazine on his own. Well, it failed after 3 months. 1935, he started a magazine. It failed after 6 months. But in 1939, he kept that magazine going, and he kept it until 1980, and he just broke even on it. But that magazine was coming to people's homes every month, and that was one of the ways that he could spread natural hygiene. I just said my favorite book. What is your favorite book that Dr. Shelton worked on? Did you also receive his reviews?
I didn't subscribe. I wasn't aware of those at the time, but I have got dozens and if not hundreds of copies of the Hygienic Review, which you've seen in my study, in my library. And I always refer to them, always. I find them just such a treasure. I wouldn't give them away for all the money in the world, because the wisdom in those books is just priceless, to be honest. So I have got a lot of copies. I'd love to get more, but I didn't subscribe at the time. But my favourite book, and I've read many of Dr. Shelton's books, I think my favourite one is Man's Pristine Way of Life. Mm-hmm. And I think I go through this book about once every 3 or 4 years, and I've got every page underlined. It's just, every page carries standalone wisdom. You can't just sit down and read it like a novel. Every page jumps out at you with these nuggets of wisdom. You go, wow, and you've got to really camp on that particular thought or piece of wisdom for a little while and think about it. It gets you to think. I think this was the biggest impact that any of his works had on me, was this particular. Now, I don't know what volume that was. I wouldn't know, but I just know it is just such a wonderful book. You can see there that I've underlined many of the thoughts that Dr. Shelton wrote down, and it had a high impact on me, for sure. What was the reaction when Dr. Shelton ran for the presidency, Jean?
That was in 1956, and he was so popular that the public reached out to the third party and had his name put on the presidency. I mean, that's how much he was well liked. Now, when I spoke with Dr. Shelton, he said that he appreciated the nomination. However, he was not going to get involved with publicizing himself. He was greatly happy with being the hygienic doctor that he was, but grateful that people thought that much of him. Dwight Eisenhower naturally took over that election quickly. And it was also after the time that Dr. Shelton felt a need to form an organization. He wanted people to come together, and this was in 1948, before he was on the ballot. And he felt that others that were protégés of himself were suffering, that they didn't have the right, what would you say, they were practicing medicine without a license, but they were licensed in chiropractic and licensed in naturopathy. And at that time, the law was so written that even if you gave them a diet, you were practicing medicine without a license. They wanted to come together. They brought the hygienists together. That was pretty much Dr. Shelton's doing. They had a first meeting. They decided to have a conference. It was very successful, and people were coming in droves to this conference.
That was in 1949, was it, the conference?
Yes, the conference. Later on, that group was called the National Health Association, the NHA. This was the way that it was on the map. Natural hygiene was on the map. Together, they tried to establish a college. They tried to see what license was appropriate. Dr. Shelton was very in favor of self-care. He wasn't in favor of any therapeutic where you should not be dependent on anyone to, succeed with your health. If you get your fresh air and exercise, and for you to be dependent on someone else was not his expertise. He wanted to advertise self-care.
When was the last time that Dr. Shelton spoke at the American Natural Hygiene Conferences, Jane?
Dr. Shelton told me that it was 1964, and at that time he was so popular, and they wanted this book. We want to sell this book, and they had established a natural hygiene press, and so he was working on a book at night to finish. He was running the magazine, the Health Review, and also he had patients. He had patients at that time. But he did go to the conference, and he did go primarily to work with Dr. Sidwa, who from England was now very excited to meet him, and they were among the major speakers at that time. Some of them unfortunately had to stay back and stay with their patients, and so they each gave probably about 6 more lectures than they had really accounted for. After that conference, he came back and he was very tired, and he was showing signs of innovation. And he knew at that time it was time to retire from public speaking, and that he would concentrate on his writings. And that he did. He worked on his writings until his last final breath. And fortunately, at that time, Dr. Vetrano, who was his friend and co-worker, she graduated with honors from the Texas Chiropractic College. And Dr. Shelton, he hired her to help with the fast, but he was in the background, and she did a beautiful job for at least 15 years managing the fasters.
Dawn and I had the privilege of having an extended breakfast with Dr. Virginia Vetrano in the late 80s at one of the first conferences we went. I think it might have been in Florida. I can't recall where. And it was a beautiful hour and a half we spent with Virginia Vetrano, where she did exactly say what you said, Jean, that when Dr. Shelton was requested to write this book, Fasting Can Save Your Life, he was told he had a deadline. He said he couldn't do it by that time. And they said, well, we won't do it. And so he pushed and pushed and pushed himself. He didn't sleep much. He worked, as you said, and he never fully recovered and was profoundly enervated trying to get this book, Fasting Can Save Your Life, out. And even after he'd finished it, the publishers didn't publish it then. They waited another 12 months, apparently, and put him under needless stress. He didn't have to push himself as hard as he did. I remember that breakfast very clearly with Virginia Vetrano.
One more thing with Dr. Vetrano.
Yeah.
When I came to the health school, Dr. Vetrano was starting her own health school. It was called Castle of the Wise, and it was in Brownsville, Texas. She also was starting to be persecuted. There was a patient that unfortunately died in 1978, not at the health school, mind you. Fasted first, went to the hospital for 3 days with the family's advice, get him out of there, take him to the hospital, and he had passed away in the hospital. And naturally, they went 2 years going back and forth. Even Dr. Mendelsohn came down to help with the court case, and Dr. Shelton lost, of course, and he was bankrupt at that time. And he was in very saddened state, but he was one that couldn't put him down, couldn't hold him down. He decided he's going to still write, he's going to do everything possible, and the school was open for about a year after Dr. Vetrano left. He had a hard time getting someone to fill his shoes, to fill her shoes, and so they closed the school, and that's when Dr. Shelton lived with his wife, and she was glad to have him home after 64 years. Ida wanted to be in the background, and she finally got her wish. Her husband was home, and she was in the background. She didn't want to be in the foreground. And so he passed away at age 89 in his 90th year, and passed away peacefully from his heart stop.
You know, your biography of Dr. Shelton is a wonderful read. I read it about every 5 years. I go back and read it again. I think it's absolutely wonderful. But when did you start writing a screenplay based on that biography of Dr. Shelton, Jean?
That was Dr. Mendelsohn's inspiration. When he read the book, he saw a screenplay, and he told me, I know you can do this, Jean. And I did write a screenplay with his advice to do so. And it's been at Selling Your Screenplay with Ashley Scott Myers. And just keep our fingers crossed, because I do want to spread the knowledge in his life. He worked prodigiously, and we'd like to keep his image alive.
He was a prodigious writer, a prodigious speaker. He was just an intellectual giant. Died in 1985.
Yes.
Approaching 90 years of age. And his books will live on as long as humanity lives. His books will live on, and the essence of Dr. Shelton, the spirit, will never die. And you know, we are very fortunate to have Jean here, who authored the biography of Dr. Shelton, co-authored 2 books with Dr. Shelton, and is one of the few people alive today that had so much time with Dr. Shelton, and she still keeps in touch with some of his extended family and family members, which is fantastic. Thank you, Jean.
Okay. Enjoyed every minute.
Thank you.